Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another in our series of NRL live streaming sessions. Every other week on Wednesdays at this same time, we will discuss a new topic and want to encourage you to provide as much input as possible by calling or texting us with your questions or comments. The number is 1-844-424-0500, as you can see on your screen if you're watching us. Doing these radio shows and streaming sessions to help community members and the general public get a better understanding of what's involved in the federal impact assessment and provincial environmental assessment processes, and encourage viewers and listeners to participate in both of these activities. With me today is my usual co-host, Mr. Qasim Sadiq, who is the project co-lead for the Northern Road Link project. Good afternoon, Qasim. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Don. Quite well, thanks. Apart from a storm coming our way in southern Ontario, doing pretty well. Can't complain.
Get your shovel ready, Qasim. Get your shovel ready, just like last
Okay.
time, but don't hurt your back like you did last time.
I'm going to try it, Don. I'm going to try my best.
Encourage your family members to participate with you as well.
Make it inclusive, absolutely.
You can sell it that way if you like. Okay, everyone. In today's session, called Draft EA Terms of Reference, Themes of Draft Tour Comments Received, we are going to talk, not surprisingly, about the comments received to date during the draft Environmental Assessment Terms of Reference review period from both the mining industry and Indigenous communities. So, Qasim, maybe let's get started with you doing a quick run through of what we're going to cover in our very short time frame that we've got a lot of material to cover.
Absolutely, Don. So quickly, we will touch 5 key themes in this presentation today. So first, we're going to talk about where are we in the provincial tour process. Just a reminder for our audience. Number 2, themes of the draft tour comments received to date. Number 3, just a reminder that there is capacity funding opportunities available for communities to participate. Number 4, what comes next in the process? We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Number 5, the proposed tour review period coming up as the next step. So we'll sort of provide an indication of that to get communities to put that in their calendars if they'd like. And then lastly, our contact information as well.
Thank you, Qasim. And before we go any further, as you briefly talk about where we are now in the tour process. So let me just quickly run through. If we can bring up slide number 3 on the screen, and I can run through everything for us. So right now, we have just closed the draft tour review period for the draft EA tour review period, it closed on January 31st. And so now we are going through those comments and responding to them, incorporating feedback that we received from community members and the general public, making amendments where necessary to the draft tour. And then we hope to have that all done and resubmitted back to the MECP late winter, so fairly soon, late winter, very early spring. MECP then will review our responses to the comments and send them back to us, and with any other comments, and then we'll make any final changes, and then we will have finalized the proposed tour, which will then go back to MECP for a minister's decision. So that's where we stand now. There's a lot going on. This draft EA review period that we just finished was not mandatory. It wasn't required by the provincial regulators, but we did this because, as you mentioned earlier today in our radio show, Qasim, we are trying to give community members as many opportunities as possible to participate in this process and to help shape this environmental assessment. So this is where we stand now, and maybe we should dive in right now, Qasim, because of our limited time and start talking about the comments received. Let's maybe you can start things off by talking about the mining industry comments.
Yes, absolutely, Don. So the first set of comments we will review is from the mining industry, since the Northern Road Link, the northern terminus, or where the project ends on the northern side, is in the Ring of Fire area. We've received comments from mining companies in the region. So the first comment received is on the theme of regional assessment. The mining companies are sort of trying to understand the relationship between the Northern Road Link EA, which is hopefully going to be a coordinated provincial federal process, both with the federal regulators as well as the provincial ones, and the regional assessment, which is being led by the federal government for the Ring of Fire. So they want to understand what the relationship is. On the regional assessment, the federal government, or the Ministry of Environment, the department as the Impact Assessment Agency, known colloquially as IAC. So IAC will sort of talk about what the regional assessment is, what it means, and what it does. At a high level, both will be independent projects from the proponent's perspective. Then the second set of comments relates to future mine development activities. The first thing that came to their mind was that they want to ensure that the spatial conflict, and I'll break that down a little bit, that the spatial conflict between known mines or high priority exploration areas that may lead to future mine development, that's eliminated. What that means is that if there's an overlap between what the Northern Road Link is, where it goes, and potential future mine sites, they want to ensure that that conflict isn't there. They go their own separate ways and don't sort of go over each other. A reasonable point. Uh, then they would talk about the fact that they want to ensure that the location of the road services mineral exploration and future resource development. Now, the purpose of this road for the two Indigenous proponents is to enable economic development in their traditional territories. So, absolutely, this point speaks to the purpose of the Northern Road Link. And then one comment relates to a consideration of the termination of the road to the airstrip in the Ring of Fire region, because right now it just connects to the Webber Supply Road. So there's a comment around extending it to the airstrip, Don.
Thank you for that, Qasim. And if we can move to slide number 5 now, I'll continue with some of the mining industry comments. We got quite a few comments, and these ones on this particular slide relate to timing and phasing of road construction, and what the mining companies were have explicitly stated is that they'd like to see a sped up project schedule, like an expedited project schedule to get things moving faster. To get that move closer to construction faster, um, and for many reasons. And one of the reasons is to is to get more community members involved and at an as soon as possible. So to get some opportunities out there to communities, to let community members see what opportunities are available to them as soon as possible. So I thought that was an important comment. We also heard a comment from the mining companies about they'd like to see a detailed construction plan um, sooner rather than later. It just to help speed things up as well, and looking at the use of existing infrastructure such as winter road corridors to help mining lease or claim holders do their exploration in the region. So some interesting comments there. So definitely some interesting comments there, and you can see what's driving a lot of those comments. But maybe Qasim, now you can finish off those mining industry comments. As our viewers and listeners can see, uh, we've received a wide range of them. So maybe if our team can move us to slide number 6, Qasim will talk further about the mining industry comments.
Yeah, so one of the comments relates to cumulative effects assessment. Mining is a very specific industry, and their planning horizons tend to be very long, but it's also cyclical. So I, I assume that that comment is based on sort of some of their own characteristics, and the comment basically says that they want us to ensure that cumulative effects assessment or the effects that our project is likely to have on other developments, other projects in the future, for the EA includes what the mining industry considers as reasonably foreseeable projects, and that is from a data access point or the information available perspective. That's a reasonable point to make. But it's really our role to aggregate information that exists out there. So information from industry, but also from indigenous communities and regulators, and we'll certainly do that based on information available. Then there's a point about road construction in terms of the workforce. The mining industry says that there's a need for estimating road construction and operation workforce required, and they're suggesting to do so in the tour, and also to understand the skills and capacity assessment of Martin Falls, Webequie, and neighboring communities to maximize participation. And both of those will come in the environmental assessment process, certainly, as indigenous proponents. One of the directions we've received from the proponents is to ensure the participation, the maximization of participation opportunities for Martin Falls, for Webequie, but also for neighboring communities. So that will continue to be a central theme as we go through the project. And then lastly, on road construction techniques, they say that the use of wetland road building techniques needs to ensure that it complies with MTO guidelines and other standards for road building in wetlands. Again, absolutely, there's going to be a lot of engineering ingenuity that goes in, a lot of innovation. And Don, I think we'll talk about this as we go on. The different ways we're innovating from an engineering perspective, but certainly the first lens is meeting those technical requirements of the regulators.
Oh, absolutely, Qasim. I think you've touched on something there. We are aware of the fact that this road would move through some rather sensitive areas, and it requires care in its design. No question about that. Okay, let's move now to Indigenous community comments. And many of our viewers and listeners are interested in these, so we'll have a look at these. I will note that we've received other comments since this presentation was prepared, and so we didn't have time to squeeze them into this presentation, but there'll be further discussion on those additional comments received, particularly during the open house, a virtual open house, which will be virtual open houses, which will be on February 23rd and 24th at 6 p.m. So let's move now to slide number 7. So to talk about the initial topics or themes that we've grouped the comments under. So one of the one of the areas was greater involvement in the project in general. So uh, First Nations, other than the proponents, would like to be more involved in project, what they call project milestones. And another comment that was made, which is very interesting, is looking for a nation to nation format project discussions with both Martin Falls and Webequie opponents. So that's a very constructive and thoughtful comment, I think, and I think that's so that would be leadership to leadership, and I think that would be very constructive. So that's those were the comments about increased involvement in the project. There were also comments on alternative methods. So what was happening with these comments, it was other communities, other First Nation communities would like to be able to help develop the criteria to evaluate alternative methods, and ensure that the advantages and disadvantages of the different alternative methods are viewed through what they called a First Nation lens, other than the proponents, other than that of the proponents. So um, a different perspective on things for sure. So continuing on with these comments, understand, Qasim, that we did receive some comments on the proposed project infrastructure and on Aboriginal treaty rights and interests. In fact, quite a few comments, didn't we?
Yeah, absolutely, we did. And I think the next slide, slide 8, talks about that, which one theme over there, Don, was around input from communities on alternatives, water crossings, alignments, and aggregate sources. So all the physical characteristics of the project, communities said that they would want to provide input on water body, crossing structure types, span length, road alignment, aggregate extraction areas. So those are absolutely parts of the consultation effort we are going to undertake with individual communities around the project. We definitely want to have in-depth conversations on all of these aspects of the project, the physical aspects of the project. What is that alternative alignment? What does it mean to the community? What concerns them? Where should we go? Where shouldn't we go? What values do we avoid? And what do we try to provide access to for those communities as well? We've heard that from people as well. Then there is an interesting sort of reporting comment, which says disaggregated approach to reporting the results of input from in Indigenous communities. And what that says is basically they're looking for a slightly different format of reporting on input that we receive from Indigenous nations, and we'll work with the provincial regulator around how that's made accessible and with the community directly to ensure that this information is provided in a way that suits their interests. Then, similarly, another theme very important to our project on Aboriginal and treaty rights and interests. And on that point, some of the communities have said that the tour and subsequent consultation and engagement plans uh, that are made in other parts of the project, they need to adhere to the most stringent requirements associated with Ontario or IAC's environmental impact assessment processes. And I think there's absolutely no question about that in our mind as Indigenous proponents. I think if anything, our conversation actually even internally starts from there. So we're
Yes.
very keenly looking forward to having those in-depth conversations with communities.
Thank you, Qasim. Let's move on to slide number 9, and I'm going to continue that thread that you started on Aboriginal treaty rights and interests. And we received a number of comments, understandably, on this topic. And one of the interesting comments was Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous land and resource use are components of rights and interests of First Nations, but they don't represent all of the rights present in the project area. And they said these rights extend beyond just harvesting rights, or and they don't include cultural rights and other rights of importance. And these were very thoughtful comments. And one of the I thought, one thing that was really interesting was it was very constructive because they looked at our preliminary valued components and provided suggestions as to improve our evaluation of these by suggesting other indicators or measuring tools, impact measurement tools, if you may, for the valued components. Valued components are what are important to community members in a nutshell. So they suggested things like availability and fragmentation of land for rights-based activities and other interests, measuring that. They also identified perception of availability of land for rights-based activities. Very, very constructive, interesting comments, I thought. And Qasim, we also got some comments on the preliminary valued components or VCs and how Indigenous knowledge and land or resource use needs to be more broadly defined. Maybe you can talk a bit about those on slide number 10.
Yeah, absolutely, Don. One of the interesting comments I think we received was around that around valued components associated with cultural continuity and well-being. This suggests that an indicator be sort of inclusive of cultural landscapes. When someone says culture, we do sort of understand what the word means, but cultural landscapes, it paints a broader picture of what that means for a community, for a place, and for a nation. And they want us to also look at safe access to travel routes for necessary practicing of rights. Absolutely, very important aspects of the project to see how communities and members participate their Indigenous and Aboriginal rights, including moving across their traditional territories to get from point A to point B. And that certainly is something which will continue to be of interest. And those conversations, I think, will be very in depth as well. Then there's another sort of take on governance that's put forward by communities. They say that there should be a governance indicator which changes to sort of indigenous authority and jurisdiction through imposition of colonial regulatory processes. So they're more interested in governance from an indigenous authority and jurisdiction lens, which is impacted by Canada's colonial past. And Martin Falls and Webber as indigenous proponents have a lot of interest in this question around governance today and in the future. So I expect that will continue to be a very rich discussion in the future, Don.
Cosmo, some really interesting points brought up there, aren't they? Very, very thoughtful points and helpful, very helpful to our team, I should say. Let's move now to slide number 11, and we'll continue on with the discussion on Indigenous community comments, where we received a number of comments on COVID accommodation. And this is not surprising and totally understandable. And we got many questions about explaining some of the challenges faced by communities, and we were able to, we think so anyway, successfully um, help communities. I think is the best way to describe it, Qasim, in adjusting the due date for the comments on the draft tour.
Yeah, absolutely, Don. I think it's something as Indigenous proponents, knowing what Martin Falls and Webber were going through, but fortunately having the experience of working through previous COVID waves and having done that for over 2 years, fortunately communities were set up and they sort of knew what they were dealing with, but there's still time required to adjust to this new wave, and we recognize that. And comments were initially due on the 8th. We took that timeline out to the 31st, so provided a couple of more weeks. And we're very thankful to communities that were able to participate in the process. But also, hopefully, for other communities, it also acted as sort of an early indicator that the proposed store is a couple of weeks out, or a couple of months out, starting from November. Now is the time to start thinking about that process.
Yeah, so true. And in the interest of time, I realize we're running out of time. I wanted to talk a bit about weaving Indigenous knowledge into the environmental assessment. We got a number of comments about this, and just to give people a bit of a background on the EA and IA process. Previously, Indigenous knowledge was tucked away in a separate section, but now it's expected. The regulators expect proponents um, to gather as much Indigenous knowledge as possible and use it as part of their assessments in the different studies that make up an environmental assessment. So this is a this is something that we are heavily involved in. We are trying very to encourage communities to provide so that we and let's now move on to our next slide, where you are going to talk a bit about some of the other comments we received on a whole range of topics: odor, climate change, and commitments and monitoring, Qasim.
Yeah, Don, and those are all sort of related, really. Order is a function of construction because a lot of the equipment used for construction uses diesel. Some comments relate to that. We do conduct air quality assessments throughout the project. We think about and talk about construction phases as well as the long-term operation of the project itself. So that will certainly be a part of the assessment. Now, when there are emissions related to the use of diesel, that conversation ties in directly with climate change, which is such an important conversation right now. And one of the comments says that conversation needs to consider Indigenous perspectives and Indigenous knowledge. And we couldn't agree more, I think, because I don't believe we could have a holistic view without really an understanding what communities are concerned about, what they believe will help mitigate climate change and adapt for climate change, which we know is happening as we speak, Don, pretty much. And then that ties into the commitments and monitoring plans that we put into place. So that will again require a lot of conversation with communities, and we look forward to having those, but that will come significantly later in the process. But we will have those conversations as part of the environmental assessment process.
Thank you, Qasim. And let me wrap up a quick description of the Indigenous community comments by mentioning from slide 13 that we also received comments on noise and the position of noise sensitive receptors on fish, talking about including species, on making sure species are included in the for the regional study area, that the species lists get input from other communities, and then the health assessment as well too, talking about sampling organ meat from making sure we sample organ meat as part of the tissue sampling program. Now, we're running out of time here, but I think this is very important. Qasim, could you quickly tell our viewers a bit about some of the capacity funding opportunities that are available to them?
Yeah, absolutely, Don. We recognize that communities have their own priorities, and communities operate under limited resources or under resource constraints. So, as part of the project, there is capacity funding available for select Indigenous communities around the project to participate. Primarily through the Ministry of Northern Development and Mines, Natural Resources and Forestry in Ontario. If you are looking to get in touch with them and you need some assistance, please let us know, and we can absolutely make that connection and get the process started. There will also be additional funding available to select Indigenous communities for the collection of Indigenous knowledge related to the project through the project directly, and we'll provide that information as that project program starts on.
Thank you, Qasim. So let's quickly look at what comes next. Slide number 15. And just to give you a brief run through here, the draft tour review period is now closed. It closed on January 31st. We're compiling comments. The proposed tour will be finalized in late winter, very early spring, submitted to MECP. And MECP will make the proposed tour available for formal review and comment. After the review, we'll respond to comments and then submit the proposed tour back to MECP for a minister's decision, either accepted with changes, or rejected. So that wraps up this week's discussion. Lots to cover, Qasim. Thanks again for joining me. It's a good conversation. We're going to have more of these going forward on this, and join us again in a couple of weeks when we'll talk about the federal impact assessment process. And please don't forget to visit our website at northernroadlink.ca, or follow us on social media at NRL Roadlink as well. And we will see you in 2 weeks. Miigwech, take care, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.